The plate went all the way around the table and never once stopped in front of me. I watched it happen the way you watch a slow leak in a roof. You see the first drop, and some part of you already knows the whole ceiling's coming down. Brooke served her father first, then my son, then the neighbors she'd invited to impress, then the children. Turkey, the good dressing, the sweet potatoes with the pecan crust, ladle after ladle of everything she'd spent 3 days making sure looked perfect for the cameras on her phone. And when she got to me at the end of my own family's table, she looked right through me, set the serving spoon down, and said, brightly, so everyone could hear, "Oh, I didn't make a plate for you. I figured all that heavy food isn't really good for a man your age." A few people laughed. The nervous kind. My son laughed too. He was the worst of them because he laughed, and then he looked down at his own full plate so he wouldn't have to see my face. I sat there with an empty place setting in front of me. Clean fork, clean knife, folded napkin, not a crumb. In a house I'd paid for, at a Thanksgiving I'd been feeding for 50 years, and I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a boy standing outside a bakery window with no money in my pocket. I felt hungry. Then I did the only thing there was left to do. I put my napkin on the table. I stood up, and I took out my phone, because my daughter-in-law had made one mistake she didn't know about. She'd spent the entire year of her life trying to impress a man who owed everything he had, his name, his restaurants, his whole shining career, to me. My name is Edward Hollis. Most everyone calls me Ed. I'm 73 years old, and for half a century I fed the city of Louisville, Kentucky, one plate at a time. I never went to culinary school. I couldn't have afforded a week of it. I started as a boy washing dishes at a diner off Market Street, and I worked my way up to the line because the cook quit one Friday night and somebody had to flip the eggs, and it turned out that somebody was me. I had a gift I didn't ask for. I could taste a thing once and know what it was missing. Salt, acid, a little more time, a little more love. In 1974, I took every dollar I had and every dollar the bank would lend a young man with dirt under his nails, and I opened a lunch counter with 12 stools and a griddle. I named it after the only person who ever believed I'd amount to anything. My wife, Ruth. I called the place Ruthie's. We had one rule at Ruthie's, and Ruth painted it on the wall herself the day we opened, in her own hand, in yellow paint that I never once let anybody touch up because it was hers. Everybody eats. That meant something. It meant if you came in with money, you ate. If you came in without it, you ate anyway and paid me when you could, or you didn't pay me at all, and I fed you the same food on the same plate because a hungry man doesn't need a lecture, he needs supper. For 50 years, nobody left Ruthie's hungry. Cops and janitors and mayors and men just out of prison, and church ladies and the fellow who slept behind the dumpster on 10th Street. They all sat at my counter, and they all ate, and Ruth stood at that register with her yellow-painted rule over her shoulder and treated every last one of them like they were somebody's whole world. Because to somebody they were. Ruthie's grew. One counter became a restaurant. One restaurant became the kind of place people drove 2 hours for, the kind that gets written up, the kind where a governor once waited 40 minutes for a table and didn't complain because everybody waits, everybody eats. But it never stopped being that lunch counter to me. Every morning for 50 years, I got there before the sun, I turned on the griddle, and I cooked for whoever walked through my door. Ruth died 2 years ago, right there in the restaurant. If you can believe it, on a Sunday afternoon, sitting at the corner table she liked with a cup of coffee going cold in front of her. Her heart just quietly closed up shop. The doctors gave me a lot of words. All I heard was that I'd walked into my own restaurant and my life was over. I kept the place open. I kept a rule on the wall. And I told myself that as long as somebody was eating under that yellow paint, some part of Ruth was still standing at the register, making sure of it. I never dreamed the person who'd try to take all of it away from me would be sitting at my own Thanksgiving table. Let me tell you about my son, Grant, because you have to understand him before you can understand how a man ends up with an empty plate at his own table. Grant was a good boy once. I mean that. He grew up in the back booth of Ruthie's doing his homework while his mother refilled coffee, and he was loved, and he was fed, and he wanted for nothing except the one thing I apparently couldn't give him. He wanted to be the kind of man who didn't smell like a kitchen. Somewhere around 30, Grant got ashamed. Not of anything specific. Of all of it. Of the grease under my nails. Of the yellow paint on the wall that he started calling tacky. Of the fact that his father was famous, but famous in an apron, at a lunch counter, feeding people who couldn't do a thing for him. He wanted a different kind of famous. The kind with white tablecloths and a valet and a name that photographed well. And then he met Brooke, and Brooke gave that hunger a shape. Brooke was a chef too, and I'll say this, the girl had real talent. I tasted her food more than once, and there was something there, a genuine gift buried under about 10 pounds of ambition. But Brooke didn't want to feed people. Brooke wanted to be seen feeding people. There's a world of difference, and it's the whole difference, and it took me too long to say it out loud. She looked at Ruthie's, and she didn't see 50 years of everybody eats. She saw an unsophisticated old lunch counter run by a relic who didn't understand the market. She looked at me, and she saw an obstacle in an apron. After they married, Grant and Brooke started what they like to call helping me modernize. Grant handled the business side. Brooke handled the vision. And slowly, the way a slow leak works, they started taking Ruthie's apart. First it was the menu. Half the plates Ruth built with her own hands, gone, replaced with things that cost triple and fed you half. Then it was the prices and the counter stools, which Brooke called a liability. Then one morning I came in before the sun the way I had for 50 years in Ruth's photograph, the one that hung by the register, my Ruth laughing with a coffee pot in her hand, was gone off the wall. Grant said it didn't fit the new aesthetic. He'd put it in a box in the office. I hung it back up myself. It came down again a week later. I hung it up again. This went on. Nobody ever said the word no to me out loud. That's the thing about how a family takes something from you. It's never a fight. It's 100 small surrenders, and every time you let one go, you teach them the next one's free. There was one person in that family who never once made me feel like a relic. Me Gudangson, Pao She Dwalvi, Grant and Brooke's boy. Though the good Lord alone knows how those two produced a child that gentle. He's got his grandmother's way about him. He notices when a person's been left out of conversation, and he goes and stands next to them. Every Sunday, no matter what his parents said about the germs and the long hours, Theo would turn up at Ruthie's before dawn, and he'd stand on a milk crate next to me at the griddle, and I'd teach him. Not fancy things. How to crack an egg with one hand. How to know a pancake's ready by the bubbles, not the clock. How to taste a pot of greens and tell it what it's missing. He had it. The same gift I've been born with, the one you can't teach, the one that just lives in a person or it doesn't. Grandpa, he asked me one morning, flipping his very first perfect egg, why does Mom say Ruthie's is behind the times? I looked at that boy, at his grandmother's careful hands. Some folks think feeding people is about being ahead of the times. I told him, it isn't. It's the oldest thing there is. Ahead, behind, a hungry man doesn't care what time it is. He just wants to eat. Theo thought about that the way children do, holding it, turning it over. I don't think you're behind the times, he said finally. I think you're just old-fashioned about the wrong thing being important. 12 years old, and he understood me better than his own father had in 20 years. Here's the part where the leak becomes a flood, and it starts of all places with a phone call I made in kindness. Around the start of that November, Brooke got the fever bad. She wanted her own restaurant. Not Ruthie's, something new, something hers, something with her name on the door and no yellow paint anywhere near it. And to get it, she needed money and a name behind her. And in this city, there's exactly one name that opens every door in the food world. Marcus Valle. If you don't follow that world, you won't know him, so let me tell you who Marcus Valle is. He's the most celebrated restaurateur in this half of the country. Restaurants in 4 cities. A television show. Awards I can't pronounce. When Marcus Valle decides a young chef is worth backing, that chef's life changes overnight. And Marcus Valle had let it be known that he was looking to fund one new restaurant in Louisville, and every ambitious cook in the city was clawing to be the one. Brooke wanted it more than she'd ever wanted anything. She talked about Marcus Valle the way some people talk about God. She'd been trying for months to get a meeting with his group and getting nowhere because 1,000 other chefs wanted the same thing. Now here's what Brooke didn't know. Here's what none of them knew, because I'm not a man who talks about it. In 1989, a scrawny 15-year-old kid showed up at the back door of Ruthie's looking for work. He was sleeping in a car with his mother. He couldn't cook a lick, but there was something behind his eyes. The same something I'd had at his age, the hunger that isn't about food. I hired him to wash dishes. I fed him every shift everybody eats. And when I saw what he could do, I taught him. For 6 years, I stood behind that boy at the griddle the way I now stood behind Theo. I gave him Ruth's recipes. I gave him a key to the place. When he was ready to leave and make his own name, I drove him to the bus station myself and put $200 in his pocket, which was $200 I did not have. That boy's name was Marcus Valle. I hadn't asked him for a thing in 30 years. But that November, watching Brooke chase a dream, I could see she had the talent to reach, even if she didn't have the heart. I did something I thought was kind. I called Marcus. First time in years. He answered on the first ring, and the first word out of his mouth was the same word it had been for 30 years. Chef. I told him my daughter-in-law was a real talent, and she was trying to get in front of his group, and I'd take it as a personal favor if he'd give her a fair look. A real one. On the merits. He didn't hesitate. For you, chef, anything. Have her people send it over. I'll look at it myself. I was going to tell Brooke at Thanksgiving. That was my plan. I was going to wait until the table was full and the plates were passed, and I was going to say, Brooke, honey, Marcus Valle is going to see you himself, and you earned it, and I'm proud of you. A gift. From the old relic in the apron to the girl who couldn't stand the sight of him. I never got the chance. Because at that Thanksgiving table, before I could give her the best news of her life, she decided not to give me a plate. The days before Thanksgiving, the leak turned into something with a current to it. I overheard things I wasn't meant to. That's the curse of being treated like furniture. People forget you can hear. I heard Grant on the phone with a broker talking about what Ruthie's real estate was worth if they repositioned the site. I heard Brooke tell a friend that once she had the Valle situation locked, the smartest play was to sunset the old brand, sunset Ruthie's, and roll the equity into the new concept. I heard my son agree with her. They were going to close my wife's restaurant. Take the 50 years, the everybody eats, the yellow paint, Ruth's laughing photograph, and cash it in like a poker chip to build something with Brooke's name on the door. And there was one more thing. The worst thing. I heard Brooke, one night through the kitchen door, ask my son whether they should start looking into my situation, whether an old man running a business at 73 was really still competent to make these decisions, or whether it might be kinder for everybody if Grant had authority to sign. My own son didn't say no. He said, "Let's see how the holidays go." I stood in my own hallway in the dark, and I understood, finally and completely, that the family I'd fed for 50 years was quietly measuring me for a box. I want to see the one person outside my family I trust all the way down. Not a lawyer this time. Rosa. Rosa Vega has run my kitchen for 35 years. She came to me as a line cook when Grant was in diapers, and she's forgotten more about that kitchen than Brooke will ever learn. I found her at the end of a shift, and I told her everything, and she listened the way she does wiping down a station that was already clean because her hands need to be doing something when her heart's working. "You can stop all of it right now, Ed," she said when I finished. "You still own every brick. You could change the locks tomorrow. You could cut them off. One phone call to your bank, and they're nothing." She turned around. "You want me to tell you why you won't? Tell me. Because you're hoping. Same as always. You keep thinking if you just feed them long enough, they'll remember who they are." She shook her head, and there was love in it, and there was warning in it. It's the people you can't feed full. The more you give them, the emptier they get, and they'll hate you for the plate. I knew she was right. I knew it the way you know the roof's really gone. But I couldn't do it yet. I couldn't be the one to close Ruth's restaurant, even to save it. So I did the thing I've regretted and not regretted in equal measure ever since. I decided to let Thanksgiving come. I decided to give Brooke her gift and give my son one more chance to be the boy who did his homework in the back booth and see, one last time, whether there was anyone left in that family worth all the feeding. I got my answer with an empty plate. Thanksgiving at Ruthie's is a 50-year tradition. Every year on the day itself, we closed the restaurant to the public and set the long tables, and the family ate there, under Ruth's yellow paint, surrounded by the place that raised us. That year, Brooke had taken over the hosting, which meant she'd turned my wife's restaurant into a stage. She'd invited people I didn't know, a food writer, a couple with money she was courting, faces she wanted to be seen by. She'd catered it herself, showcase plates, every dish styled for a photograph. And she'd done one more thing. She'd taken Ruth's photograph off the wall again for the occasion, so the space would read cleaner. "Just for the day," she said. I found it face down in a box in the office an hour before dinner. I stood it up on the office desk so my wife could at least watch the meal from there. I dressed nice. My one good jacket. I sat where I always sat, at the foot of the long table, under the register, under the yellow paint, in the spot where I'd said grace every Thanksgiving for 50 years. Except this year Brooke's father said grace because Brooke asked him to, and nobody asked me anything at all. Then the plates went around. And you know already how far the plate got before it reached me. You know it stopped one seat short, every single ladle of it. And you know what she said about a man my age, and you know my son laughed. What you don't know is how quiet it got inside me. I want to be honest with you, because I've had a long time to think about the man I am. I wasn't angry. Anger is a young man's fuel, and I burned through mine decades ago. What I felt, sitting there with a clean fork and an empty plate while my family ate the food I paid for, was something older and colder and steadier than anger. I felt decided. The way you feel when the diagnosis finally comes, and at least now, you know. Because a person shows you exactly who they are in the way they treat someone who can do nothing for them. And Brooke, in front of everyone she wanted to impress, had just shown me, had shown all of us, that when she believed I was powerless, when she believed I was nothing but an old man at the end of the table, her instinct was to let me go hungry for sport. 50 years I'd made sure everybody eats, and my own daughter-in-law couldn't spare me a spoonful. So I put my napkin on the table, and I stood up slow, my knees telling me about it, and the whole table went quiet the way a room does when the old man who never makes a scene stands up. "Sit down, Dad," Grant said, half a laugh still in it. Brooke didn't mean anything. "There's plenty I know there's plenty," I said. "There's always plenty." That was never the question. I took out my phone. Brooke rolled her eyes at her father. Here we go. The old man's confused, doesn't even know how to work the thing. I found the name. I pressed it, and I set the phone flat on the table, on speaker, in the middle of all those beautiful photograph plates, so everybody could hear. It rang once. "Chef." The voice came out of the phone warm and delighted and loud enough for the whole table to hear. "It's Thanksgiving. You're supposed to be too busy cooking to call me. What's wrong? Everything okay?" Brooke's fork stopped in the air. She knew that voice. Everybody in her world knew that voice. "Everything's fine, Marcus," I said. "I'm sitting here at Thanksgiving with my family." Wanted to hear your voice. Man, I wish I was there. Nobody sets a table like you. A pause, and then that voice got softer, the way a man's voice goes when he's telling the truth to somebody he loves. You know, I say it every year, chef, and I'll say it every year till I'm gone. I wouldn't have a single restaurant, I wouldn't have a nickel, I wouldn't have a life if you hadn't fed a starving 15-year-old at your back door and taught him everything you knew. Everything I am came off that griddle of yours. You know that, right? Tell me you know that. The table had gone so silent I could hear the second hand on the wall clock. I was looking at Brooke when I answered him. I know it, son. I'd like to tell you I planned what happened next. I didn't need to. I learned a long time ago that the truth, once it's standing up in a room, doesn't need any help from you. You just have to stop holding the door shut against it. Brooke's face had gone the color of the tablecloth because she was doing the arithmetic live in front of everyone she'd invited to watch her shine. The man she'd worshipped for a year. The man she'd chased for months. The name that could remake her life. Chef. And he was calling my father-in-law Chef. He was crying into the phone about a griddle and a back door and everything he owed. Marcus, I said, still looking at her. You remember I called you a few weeks back about a young chef. My daughter-in-law asked you to give her a fair look. Of course I remember. Got it right here on my desk, top of the pile, 'cause you asked. I told you, for you, anything. Was gonna call her myself next week. His voice brightened. She there? Put her on. Let me say hello to family of yours. And there it was. The gift. Still sitting there on the table, unopened, next to my empty plate. All Brooke had ever wanted, handed to her by the old man she'd just refused to feed. If she'd given me one spoonful of dressing, one word of kindness, she'd never even have known. She'd have gotten her meeting, gotten her shot, built her whole shining career, and gone right on believing she'd done it without me, without the relic, without the apron. I looked at her for a long moment, and then I did the only honest thing there was. Marcus, I said, I've got to take back what I asked you. The whole table flinched like one body. I asked you to look at her because I believe she had the gift, and she does. She's got real talent, and I won't pretend otherwise. But I've learned something tonight I didn't know when I called you. I've learned she doesn't understand what a kitchen is for. I kept my voice even. I wasn't performing. I was just telling my boy the truth, the way I always had. You and I built our whole lives on one rule, son. You remember it. There was a pause. And then, quietly, Marcus Vale said it. Everybody eats. Everybody eats, I said. That's the whole thing. That's the only thing. A cook who'll let a man sit hungry at her own table because she's decided he can't do anything for her. Marcus, that's not a chef. That's just somebody who knows how to plate. I can't put my name behind that. I won't. And I wouldn't insult you by asking you to. There was a long silence on the line. When Marcus spoke again, his voice had changed, gone flat and cold and careful. The voice of a man who's just understood exactly what happened in that room without needing to see it. Chef, he said, if that's your read on somebody, that's the only read I need. I've trusted your palate my whole life. I'm sure not going to start doubting your judgment of people. A beat. The Louisville spot goes to somebody else. Consider it closed. And he was gone. The phone sat there on the table, dark, in the middle of all those beautiful plates that nobody was eating anymore. Nobody moved. The food writer was staring at her lap. The couple with money were looking at the door. Brooke's father had gone rigid. And Brooke was staring at the black screen of my phone like it might come back on and take it all back. It was Grant who broke first. My son. He turned to me, and his face wasn't angry. It was stricken, the face of a boy who'd just watched the floor he was standing on turn to water. Dad, his voice cracked on it. Dad, do you have any idea what that was our whole. I know exactly what I did, I said. I stood up, same as you should have, an hour ago, when the plate went past your father. He didn't have anything to say to that. There wasn't anything. Brooke found her voice, and it came out shaking, and she reached for the only thing she had left. "You did that on purpose. You humiliated me. In front of, you planned this, you old." "No," I said, and I said it gently, because it was the truth and the truth didn't need any heat behind it. "I didn't plan a thing. I had a gift for you in my pocket. The best news of your life. I was going to give it to you tonight at this table and tell you I was proud." I picked up my phone and slid it back into my jacket. "You want to know who ruined your night, Brooke? Look at the one empty plate at this table. That's the whole story. You had everything you wanted, and you traded it for the pleasure of watching an old man go hungry. That wasn't me. That was never me. I'm the one who was going to feed you." I stood the rest of the way up. My knees complained. I was 73 years old, and I had not eaten, and I have never in my life felt more like myself. I went to the office. I got Ruth's photograph off the desk, my Ruth, laughing, coffee pot in her hand. And I carried her back out through that silent dining room, past my family and their cold showcase plates, and I hung her back on her nail by the register, under the yellow paint, where she'd stood for 50 years and where she was going to stand for 50 more. "Everybody eats," I said to the room. To all of them. That's still the rule. It was always the rule. I'm sorry any of you ever forgot it. Then a small chair scraped back, and Theo, my Theo, 12 years old, got up from his seat, walked the whole length of that long table past his frozen parents, and came and stood next to me. The way his grandmother taught him. The way you stand next to the person who's been left out. "Grandpa," he said, loud enough for everyone, "I'm still hungry. Will you make me a plate?" And God help me, I laughed for the first time in what felt like 2 years. "Come on, son," I said, and I put my hand on his shoulder. "Let's go in the kitchen. I'll teach you the dressing." We left them all sitting there. And behind me, at the register, my wife was laughing in her photograph, watching the two of us go feed somebody. Everybody eats. I won't lie to you and tell you it all healed clean. Real life doesn't tie off like a story. The new restaurant died that night, and it stayed dead. In that small world, word travels fast, and the word was that Marcus Vail had pulled a Louisville deal at the last second, personally, and nobody would say exactly why, but the people who'd been at that table talked, the way people do, and soon enough, everybody knew. That Brooke Hollis had let Ed Hollis go hungry at his own Thanksgiving. In that business, that's not a scandal. It's a verdict. Doors that had been cracking open for her swung shut all at once. And this time they stayed shut, because you can teach a person to cook, but you cannot teach them what she'd shown the whole room she didn't have. Grant and Brooke separated that spring. I won't pretend that didn't grieve me. I don't celebrate a family coming apart, not even one that measured me for a box. She's a talented woman. I hope, wherever she landed, that somebody someday teaches her the thing I never could, that a plate isn't a performance, it's a promise. I hope she learns it before she's old. Some people never do. And here's the part that surprised even Rosa. I didn't cut my son off. I sat in that restaurant with the woman who'd run my kitchen for 35 years, and I told her I'd earned the right to let Grant go hungry the rest of his life. And she agreed that I had, and then I told her I wasn't going to, and she almost smiled because I think she'd known all along I wouldn't. Cutting him off would have proved them right. Would have made the whole thing about who owned what, who got what, who won. And it was never about that. It was about a boy who forgot that the man in the apron, the one who couldn't do a single fashionable thing for him, was the one who'd fed him every day of his life. So instead, I did what I should have done years ago. I signed Ruthie's into a trust, Ruth's name on it, of course, so that no one, not Grant, not anybody, could ever sell my wife's restaurant out from under the city that ate there. I put in writing that the yellow paint never comes down and the photograph never comes off the wall, and everybody, forever, eats. I set aside a fund in Ruth's name to teach kids the trade. Kids like Marcus was kids sleeping in cars with a gift behind their eyes and nobody yet to feed them. And I made Theo, my apprentice, official on paper the way old craftsmen used to, so that when I lay down my spatula for the last time, the thing Ruth and I built passes to the one Hollis who understood what it was for. Grant comes around now. Slowly. He turned up at the back door one gray morning a few months back, the same back door where starving Marcus Vale once knocked. And he stood there a long while before he came in, and when I opened up he didn't have a speech. He just said, "I'll let the plate go past you, Dad. I'll be sorry about that till I die." And I said, "I know. Coming out of cold. You look like you haven't eaten." And I made my son a plate. Because everybody eats. Even the ones who forgot it. Especially the ones who forgot it. Because a hungry man doesn't need a lecture. He needs supper, and a door that opens, and somebody who never stopped believing he might still remember who he is. He stands at the griddle with Theo and me some mornings now. He's clumsy at it. 40 years old, and he never learned, because he spent those years being ashamed of the only inheritance that ever mattered. But he's learning. Last week he flipped an egg one-handed and looked over at me like a boy who'd hit a home run, and something got put right in that kitchen that no restaurant deal and no famous name could ever have fixed. People ask me sometimes if I regret it. That one phone call, taking back the gift, letting her dream die on the speaker in front of everyone. And my answer surprises them. No, I regret that she made it necessary. I regret every small surrender in the years before. Every time the photograph came down and I only quietly hung it back up instead of asking the person who took it down what kind of man takes a dead woman's picture off a wall. All that quiet taught my family one lesson, that the old man would absorb anything. And a lesson like that only ends one way. It ends with an empty plate at the end of your own table. The great mistake people make about getting old is thinking that the softness in your hands means there's softness in your spine. My daughter-in-law looked at me and saw a man with nothing left to give and nothing left to take away. She forgot that I'd spent 50 years building the one thing that can't be taken by time or ambition or a broker's phone call, a name that meant this is a man who feeds people. She could have had all of it. All she had to do was pass the plate. If there's one thing my story has taught me, it's this. Don't measure a person by the beautiful things they can make. Anybody with talent can plate a photograph. Measure them by whether they'll feed the one who can do nothing for them, the old man at the end of the table, the kid at the back door, the fellow behind the dumpster on 10th Street. That's the whole test. That's the only test. Everybody eats, or you never understood what a table was for in the first place. I built a place where everybody eats for a woman who's gone, and I raised a son who forgot it and a grandson who never will. The yellow paint's still on the wall. Ruth's still laughing by the register. And every morning, before the sun, an old man and a boy on a milk crate turn on the griddle and cook for whoever walks through the door. That's the meal that matters. Not the showcase. Not the photograph. The plate you set down in front of the person the whole world walked past. That one's yours forever. That one, no one could take. If this story meant something to you tonight, if you've ever been made to feel small at a table you helped set, or left out by the people you spent your life taking care of, I hope you'll tell me about it in the comments. Your story matters too, and somebody reading needs to hear it. And if you'd like to stay for more stories about family, dignity, and the quiet strength it takes to stand up without ever raising your voice, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe and come back for the next one. Because sometimes the person they refuse to serve is the only one at the table who ever understood what the meal was really for. They just forgot to ask who taught the whole world to cook.